It honestly may go without saying at this point in the offseason, but I truly believe that Kentucky basketball just might have the best offense in the country this season.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be taking a look at some comments by a Kentucky basketball assistant coach about this offense. I truly believe, after listening to what they had to say, Kentucky's probably going to have one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the nation this upcoming season. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more, and as playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky basketball assistant coach Cody Fueger has had an interesting conversation with Ben Roberts of the Herald-Leader. Excellent article that Ben Roberts put together. If you want to go check this piece out, again, you can just check it out at the Lexington Herald-Leader or Kentucky.com. He had an interview discussing Kentucky basketball's offense with assistant coach Cody Fueger, and I think the staff's approach to analytics as a whole has been fascinating to hear about throughout the course of this offseason. I obviously, as we have gone through what is heading into now 3 years of Locked On Kentucky, I have talked a lot about numbers and just how important certain things are. Statistics, KenPom's, the Evan Miyakawa rating system. You can go look at a variety of different websites that provide you really important facts and analysis that I think are relevant whenever breaking down different games and just breaking down how a team could or is performing, right? We've heard all of the different things in which some of them have become almost cliche at this point to say about Mark Pope and his offense in the system that he runs. It's going to be fast-paced. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of three-pointers, and it's going to be very aggressive. This team is going to be very aggressive in everything that they do. Lots of energy. And Fueger had an interesting comment to Ben Roberts about, how they're going to approach three-point shooting. And I really think that we need to stop and focus on what these guys are saying, especially about how practice is kind of unfolding here as they talk about their philosophy, their expectations, their goals. And one of the things that Fueger has said a ton is that he wants Kentucky to shoot at least 35 threes a game. And he said about last year with BYU, he said they averaged 32, which was second best in the country. And he said personally, he and the offense, they didn't do a good enough job of getting guys set up to take those shots. But he wants to push the number to 35, which would have led the country last year. And my only assumption is would lead the country this season. He said, our goal last year at BYU was 35 too. I just didn't do a good enough job of getting them going. BYU, during Mark Pope's time there, and also you can go all the way back to Utah Valley, especially for Pope's first 2 seasons at Utah Valley, they relied on the three-point shot way more than your average team does. And so the question that we've asked here on the show, looking at Kentucky's personnel for this upcoming season, will they be able to replicate the success that Pope had at BYU offensively, just as a whole, right? Are they going to be able to be as aggressive from beyond the three-point line? Are they going to be able to stay as efficient as they have been inside the arc? Because in case you don't know, you can go look at this on KenPom right now. BYU was 8th in the country last season in 2-point field goal percentage. They shot almost 50. They shot over 57% from inside the arc. will they be able to replicate some of those numbers? And we've kind of maintained the position so far here throughout the offseason. The answer is yes, if they are able to kind of maintain course and stick with the game plan. They're able to implement the offense from a set and from a play-by-play standpoint. There are some weaknesses, I think, that we need to get into here later on in the show that could start to fester throughout the season with this Kentucky roster. But on the whole, I think that guys like Fueger and guys like Pope and obviously the rest of the staff, they have put this thing together beautifully to work the way they want it to work. And Mark Pope has said as much in his most recent press conference. They're going to try and win the way they know how to win. And the way that these guys across the board at each position stack up, they have really done a great job of making sure all of the pieces fit where they want them to fit. They've got three-point shooters. They've got defenders. They've got passers. They've got rebounders. They fit every single category. There is not a significant weakness except for one that we'll get to later when it comes to just how well-rounded this roster is. And Fueger has talked a lot about how important tempo and three-point shooting is going to be to this personnel team or grouping, to how this team is going to operate. And early on in the process, when we talked about Mark Pope and his analytics and whether or not he was actually going to be able to do this again, just kind of copy and paste stats over from BYU's season in 2023, I said that, there were some concerns that they weren't going to be able to do that because it's just a completely different group of kids. And also you have to ask the question, how quickly are they going to be able to gel? Are they going to be able to actually build that chemistry that people like the BYU's roster had a season ago? I think that Kentucky, I think I said at the time, and we can go back and check. I think I said at the time, Kentucky can obviously take and make threes and run, but they may not be quite as fast or quite as aggressive as they were a season ago. And then you get information like this, where you hear guys like Fueger say, no, we are going to push the pace. And he's actually talked just how important that's been and is going to be with the guys that they have brought in for this year. And I think that's also another really important aspect of this, right? We talk about the three-point shooting. We talk about the transition game. We talk about how this thing is going to look relative to years past. And I'm not sitting here telling you the personnel doesn't matter. I'm actually saying the opposite of that. Initially in the offseason, I'm like, well, they're not going to be able to replicate it because they don't have the same guys. Well, I think they're going to be able to replicate it, and honestly, it may end up being better because of the ability to recruit. Kentucky's gotten some really, really good players in here through the portal, and the ability to get some veteran, smart guys, which it also looks like Kentucky has been able to do. But Fueger talked about one player in particular, and that's Koby Brea, about how he's going to be utilized. And he was talking about how to get to 35 three-point attempts per game. He said, and again, this is in the article, well, that's one way we can get to 35, talking about tempo. And that way, you get your guys to run. If you're a shooter and you're like, what's the best three I can get off? Koby Brea was at like 1.4 or 1.5 points per possession on threes and transition. That dude's going to be running his tail off to get threes off. Same with Jaxson Robinson. He was over 1.3 points per possession in transition. If that's your best points per possession, why not get more? So that's going to make these guys run. And then Ben Roberts points out, for sake of reference, national champion UConn was the country's most efficient team last season at a little less than 1.2 points per possession. So if you have multiple guys on your roster who have size and the ability to shoot that were extremely successful in transition, better on average than the most efficient team in college basketball a season ago, Fueger asks the question that everyone would ask at that point. Why wouldn't you try and get that shot almost every single time you come down the floor? It's a good question. Why didn't Kentucky do that a season ago when they had two of the best three-point shooters in the nation? Three of them, actually. Three of them. I think arguably three of the best in the draft this year with Reeves, Dillingham, and Shepard. It's a good question. Why didn't they do that? I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you are simply burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home huge wins. You can keep your ride or die alive over at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Anyway, Jaxson Robinson and Koby Brea are, I think, going to be very important pieces for this roster this upcoming season. If he's identifying, hey, these guys know how to do what we want to do with our system really, really well, and we're going to try and find those shots for them more, I think that's refreshing, especially considering just how, I don't want to say underutilized both of these players were a season ago, but they were in circumstances where they could have, I think, arguably been getting more opportunities. Obviously, Jaxson Robinson was the sixth man. He came off the bench for BYU a season ago. Now he led the team in scoring, and he jacked up a ton of shots, but I think that you can find opportunities to get him in better spots and let him shoot as much, if not more, this season at Kentucky, especially with him being between the 2 and the 3, or the 3 and the 4, and with how the rotation is going to work out. But Brea is a very interesting case. He's somebody that we've talked about, and I'm probably going to do a whole episode on him soon. Brea played at Dayton a season ago, a team that was 332nd in the nation in tempo. They did not run up and down the court. They were very slow. And they were also simultaneously one of the best three-point shooting teams in the nation. They were third in the country in three-point shooting at 39.9%. They had 3 different guys that took at least 100 threes, that shot over 40% from beyond the arc. And then their center, Deron Holmes, he shot 38.6%, and he took 83 threes. They had some really good shooters on this roster, and they obviously relied on the outside shot as a result of that, but they played slow. Why? Why did they play slow? Why, if you had somebody like Koby Brea, who averaged 1.4, 1.5 points per possession, why did you not get him the ball more? And you may say, well, they did get him the ball a decent amount. They did not. We talked about this. We've talked about this a ton with Brea. If you go and look at KenPom, and you go and look at how the roster was constructed and how guys were utilized in terms of possessions used, percentage of possessions used, Koby Brea was actually not even in the top 5. He wasn't even in the top 6. Koby Brea was 7th on the team in percentage of possessions used at 14.2%. Despite having the nation's second best true shooting percentage at 72.2%. He shot 49.8% from 3, and they used 6 other guys more than him. Why? I don't know. But here's a fun little fact about Dayton, and I want to relate this to Kentucky. Dayton was getting 28 points per game from 3, while taking 23.5 threes a game. They shot 39.9% from deep, right? If they took just 4 more three-point shots a game, which, where do you get those possessions? Well, you could have more tempo. You could be better at offensive rebounding, which Dayton was really bad at last year. You could create more turnovers, which Dayton was also really bad at last year. They were 11th in the A-10. You could get more stops, which they had a good defense. It was a top 60 defense, but it wasn't a great defense. You could definitely, they had a top 60 or 70 defense. They were 67th in the nation. You could do a better job, I think, of protecting the rim in conference play, certainly. But if you just get 4 more three-point attempts, you take that number from 23.5 to 27.5, it means they would have hit, on average, 11 threes a game if they shot the same clip, which would be 33 points instead of 28 a game. And that 5-point difference would have actually been significant in a lot of their games last season. Take a look with me real quick. Their second game of the season, they lost to Northwestern. They lost by 6 points. Conference game, January 27th. Their third loss of the season, they lost to Richmond. They lost that game by 5 points. 4 games later, they played VCU. They lost that game by 2 points. George Mason, they lost that game by 4 points. Loyola Chicago, they lost that game by 5 points. That right there, those right there were 5 of their 6 losses in the regular season. You could have been in a better spot in the A10 tournament, which, by the way, in case you don't know, they finished third behind Loyola Chicago and Richmond, which they ended up losing to both of those teams head-to-head. Could have beaten them both on the road, potentially. Could have at least either made the game significantly more competitive or taken it to overtime. Excuse me. Then you lost in the A10 tournament to Duquesne, which went on to beat BYU, funnily enough. They actually won that tournament. Duquesne, by the way, finished the season 25-12 and just went on a tear at the end of the year. At one point, they were 16-11, 6-8. You could have faced a different opponent. You could have gone deeper in the A10 tournament, that is. And you could have possibly had a different outcome in the NCAA tournament. You barely won your first game against Nevada, and then you lost by 10 to Arizona. You take more threes, you play with more pace, you make that game significantly more competitive. You could potentially knock out a 2 seed and send Arizona packing once again early on in the tournament. There are so many different ways Dayton could have approached this. They could have either been more aggressive with one of the categories that they were failing in, whether that be offensive rebounding, turnovers, tempo. If you have the personnel to do one thing well, which is score points, and at the end of the day, you score more points than your opponent, you win the game. You're trying to figure out how to score more points. If you have 4 guys, Deron Holmes, Colby Elvis, Nate Santos, and Koby Brea, that were all shooting lights out at their position, and they all have height to them, or at least 3 of them had height to them, some physicality. I mean, you could have been better. I think Dayton could have been better than what they were a season ago. What do we think about Kentucky then? Well, Kentucky has been able to grab pieces like Koby Brea, Kirk Carissa, Jaxson Robinson, Otega Owe, guys who shot very, very well in catch-and-shoot situations and were really good in transition a season ago. They're going to make these guys play with tempo. They're going to try and get those possessions back while also, at the same time, playing aggressive defense and trying to get as many stops as possible. Last season, Kentucky didn't play great defense. And statistically, if you want to get technical about it, yes, Kentucky had a very bad defense from a points per game perspective. But from an analytics perspective, from an efficiency perspective, they were still top 3rd in the nation in defensive efficiency, effective field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, 2-point percentage, and steal percentage. They were 1st in the nation in block percentage as well. Why did Kentucky give up so many points? It's because they played with such an aggressive tempo. They were 12th in the nation in adjusted tempo. They played fast and they shot a ton, and they weren't great at grabbing offensive rebounds or preventing them, for that matter. Kentucky did not maximize their abilities to get or prevent second chance opportunities or create extra possessions through creating turnovers. They were terrible at rebounding and turnovers last year, outside of taking care of the ball on offense. And they shot a ton. And yes, they were efficient when they scored, but then the opponent has more time and more opportunities if you're not going to either try and take some or give them some because you give more time on the clock because you're playing faster. You're going to give them more chances to score. And even if they're shooting at an average clip, right, which Kentucky opponents essentially were a season ago, if they're shooting at slightly average or slightly underneath average from the field, they're still going to get more points than they normally do because you're giving them those opportunities, because you're shortening the amount of possessions that you get a game. The difference between Kentucky this year and Kentucky a season ago is going to be how they play on the defensive end. The offense is going to look similar in terms of the end results on paper. Now, visually, how they want to run their stuff, as far as the way that Mark Pope wants to run 5 out, it's going to look different, but the numbers are going to pretty much, I think, stay the same on the offensive side of the ball. The thing that Kentucky needs to do, that Dayton and Kentucky a season ago didn't do, is take advantage of what you get on defense and grab rebounds and create turnovers. This team, I think, is going to do that just a little bit better than they did. At the very least, a little bit better. And if they do it just a little bit better, they're going to be great. And if they do it better, they're going to be a really, really good team. By the way, last year, Mark Pope and BYU, they were number 21 in the nation in offensive rebound percentage on the defensive side of the ball. Just prevent those possessions. Prevent giving up extra possessions. That's all you got to do. I think that Cody Fueger and guys like Mark Pope, I think they've got this roster figured out. I think they are in a very good spot with this roster moving forward. The offense, I think, is going to be one of the best in the country. They've got guys that can run it and run it very well. It's going to end up being what happens on the defensive end is going to be defining this season, I think. That's going to end up being what defines this year. Before we wrap up the show, just want to remind you guys, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, and I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down for a variety of sports, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't quite sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. That is FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, continuing along here on the Friday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. Again, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. Let me know what you think about Kentucky's offense and what the numbers say. I think it's going to be super, super fun to see how this pans out. I really do think this group scoring the ball is going to be so fun to watch. Defensively, I think is where things are going to start to define wins and losses. And you have guys like Lamont Butler, you have guys like Otega Owe, Amari Williams, Brandon Garrison as well. You've got guys on this roster that can get stops individually. We just have to see it. Hopefully this staff can bring it out in them. And I want to talk about the individual here for Kentucky basketball because I think there are two major weaknesses. Not major. There are two weaknesses for the Wildcats that could be an issue this upcoming season. Could or may not. And the first one is what happens outside of the Mark Pope system? What happens when you're not running a set? You're just running a ball screen, or you're asking somebody to create an isolation. Kentucky had a few guys last year that could break you down in ISO situations, and it was really fun to watch. At the same time, Kentucky was also one of the best teams in the country in terms of assists per game. This team, this BYU team, I think is going to score a ton, and they're also going to distribute the ball a ton. It's what the system does. The system works, and these guys, I think, are going to run it very well. But in the close games where your system's not working perfectly, or maybe it is working well, but you need to turn to different things to try and, make something happen at the end of the game, or when the game gets tight. Do you have players on this roster that can score off the dribble consistently? Lamont Butler was not good at it last season, and he's going to be starting at point guard. If you look up and down this roster, and you look at what their weaknesses were coming out of the transfer portal, creating off the dribble, a lot of these guys struggled with it. Otega always struggled with it as well. You've got a number of players that were not great in isolation. Now they fit the system not just well, but very, very well when it comes to you've got guys that are really good in catch and shoot or spot up situations. But as far as making those tough shots one-on-one at the end of the game, Kentucky doesn't have a ton of guys that do that very well or even well to begin with. They've got a lot of underneath average, subpar players when it comes to creating off the dribble. That is my biggest concern heading into this season. Do you have players that can operate individually outside of Mark Pope's system and find ways to score? Do you have guys that can create off the dribble? Last year at BYU, Pope had a couple. I think Dallin Hall obviously was a big one. Richie Saunders was somebody else that, while he was a very good player scoring off cuts and stuff like that, he also could create a little bit in the mid-range. Hall, I think, primarily was their guy in the mid-range area. And you see tough shots. I think the perfect game to go to is to go watch that Kansas game at the end of it. I mean, just some really, really tough buckets from Hall and a couple different players. But could that be an issue? Could that be a weakness? Maybe. I think you're going to see Kentucky struggle with that sometimes. How much will it matter? I think that is determined by some things that we heard Mark Pope say in his press conference just a couple of days ago and how they operate on the court. If you didn't listen to yesterday's episode, we broke down essentially every single thing that Mark Pope said in his press conference about the practices, about how the team's operating, and something that he really harped on was a player-led team. And about how when these players are on the court, if they are able to, instead of looking over and making sure that Mark Pope's happy, they're able to communicate and hold each other accountable on their own, you're going to see a lot of success. With that being said, they're also operating on their own. Will they really at any point step away from what Mark Pope wants them to do? Or will they be able to digest that and essentially go out there and run stuff every single time the way that they know that they should without having to be constantly reminded or tweaked, essentially, either while they're playing or during timeouts? Mark Pope obviously said he wants it to be a player-led team. So the question is, will it actually matter? Well, maybe. It just really does depend. How much is this team able to develop in the next couple of months before the season starts? Few months, I should say. And then the second thing is, like, maybe some of these guys do end up hitting those tough shots in ISO or off the dribble. Maybe they just are able to find out, hey, maybe they're just built different this year. I don't know. That could end up being a thing. Sometimes numbers are not always everything. Sometimes you just got a little bit of dog in you and you hit a shot that's important. It may not matter. The assist rate is not going to go down, I think, for Kentucky. I think you're going to see Kentucky through the roof, scoring and passing the ball. And I think something that may also offset ISO scoring from some of Kentucky's ball handlers or creating off the dribble is getting your big men involved. Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison, I think, can get involved in this offense in two different ways. Obviously, Amari Williams, I think, can be a good passer. We've talked about that. Pope talked about it. Cody Fueger talked about it during his interview with Ben Roberts. The team is going to have passing bigs. That's what Mark Pope wanted coming out of the portal. You want somebody like Ali Khalifa, but the thing about the difference between Khalifa and Williams is that Williams is, I think, a couple inches taller, physically way more dominant, and is also a way better defensive prospect. Brandon Garrison, I think, can also get involved in the passing game a little bit, but also as a scorer. Same thing with Amari. Both these guys are going to be great role players, and they're going to be great pop players that can also get back out to the three-point line and distribute elsewhere. Obviously, these two guys are not three-point shooters, but they can pass, and they can also roll to the rim, catch lobs. BYU's got a ton of different sets for that. We actually had on the show Jordan Sperber, who did two phenomenal videos about BYU's offense underneath Pope. We had him on the show to kind of break different stuff down, but Kentucky's going to have a bunch of different sets where if they're not looking for a three, you can catch people napping on backdoors and lobs and stuff like that. Williams and Garrison can get involved, I think, and kind of take away from maybe some of those more difficult shots that some guards would have to take off the dribble. Just work it down to a big man. Obviously, Williams, I think, is a good post-up player, as is Brandon Garrison, which is why I'm so excited about him individually, by the way. Just kind of go off on a tangent for a second. Garrison is going to be a really good player for Kentucky, I think, for years to come, as long as he stays here, knock on wood. because you don't just like stumble across a McDonald's All-American that played well during his freshman season in arguably the toughest conference in America. You don't just stumble across that in the portal every given year. Garrison has the potential to pan out into something special. And the fact that he's in a Kentucky uniform, he's able to get more attention. He's able to, I think, arguably be in a better place as far as development goes, be in what could end up being a better system for him. I think it's awesome. I think he's going to shine. I'm excited for Garrison, man. But these two big men, I think, will kind of maybe knock down some of the issues that you have when you talk about the ability to create off the dribble and stuff like that Kentucky may have an issue with. So that's my 2 cents on Kentucky and maybe potentially what could be their inability to create in isolation. It may not really matter at the end of the day, or it may not be an issue. Who knows? All right, I want to really kind of tie into what I just said into a bold prediction to wrap the show up. We got a bold prediction here from Holler Talk earlier, I think yesterday actually on the YouTube channel, and this kind of ties into what I just was talking about, the involvement of big men, not just as scorers, but passers as well. And he says his bold prediction is a Kentucky center who will lead the team in assists and will be top 5 in the SEC as well. Ali Khalifa, the center for BYU a season ago, came off the bench, if I'm not mistaken, and was 3rd in the Big 12 in assist rate. 3rd as a 6'11" big man. And I think he averaged over 4 assists a game. Amari Williams, there's a world where he's able to be that, and goodness gracious, if he has like a through-the-roof assist rate, and he's also as good as he is defensively, that's an NBA draft pick. That's like definitely a first-round draft pick. I'm sorry. He could easily work his way into the first round if he develops as a passer, because then you have like 3 different things you can work on: post moves, rebounding on both sides of the ball, passing, and defense. Like, he would be a very well-rounded prospect. Would remind me of like a Robert Williams type, I think. I don't know if Robert shoots threes. Anyway, a Kentucky center that would lead the team in an assist. I'm gonna say that's a 7 on the boldness scale. It could happen. At the same time, you got guys like Kirk Carissa and Lamont Butler. But could they average more assists than an Amari Williams, who does a really good job, dishing out the ball? And you've had both the head coach and an assistant talk about how important that's going to be and how good he is at it. That's why they brought him in. This could very well, it could happen. It's bold, but I really like this take from Holler Talk, and I wanted to tie it in here today because I think there's a world where Kentucky's got different players who are doing things statistically and just visually that you don't really see out of their position typically. And not only is that fun, but also if it's effective, I say rock with it. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.